The bulldozer was halfway through clearing invasive brush near the creek behind my property when I saw the golf cart barreling down the gravel path like it was a SWAT team. 2 plastic lawn chairs had been zip-tied to the back, and there she was, Verna Alcott, head of the HOA's so-called Civic Compliance Committee, standing in the cart like some kind of suburban overlord. Her frosted bob was practically vibrating with outrage. She jumped off before the cart even stopped, heels sinking into the dirt. "Excuse me, stop that machine this instant," she barked, pointing a French manicured finger at my bulldozer like it had insulted her cats. I climbed down, wiping sweat off my brow. "Verna, what in the world are you doing? You're disturbing protected lands. That creek is under HOA conservation guidelines. You can't just bring in heavy machinery without board approval," she snapped, planting herself between me and the machine like she thought I wouldn't plow right around her. I tried to keep my tone level, but the absurdity was almost laughable. "Verna, this isn't HOA jurisdiction. That creek flows into the county reservoir. It's under environmental regulation." "That's exactly why you can't touch it," she shrieked. "I'm issuing a cease and desist right now." From the back of the cart, her husband Dale, who wore a laminated HOA security badge like it meant something, pulled out a clipboard and started scribbling nonsense. The man once threatened to fine a neighbor for hanging wind chimes. I crossed my arms. "You don't have authority over this land. It was annexed out of HOA control 8 years ago." Verna's face twisted. "That paperwork was never properly filed. As far as the board is concerned, this is common area. And we will not allow you to destroy it." I opened the door to my truck and pulled out a manila folder. "You sure about that?" She narrowed her eyes. "I don't care what you printed off the internet." I flipped open the folder and showed her the stamped county records. "I'm not just some guy with a bulldozer. I'm Brandon Greeley, Regional Director of Environmental Compliance. That creek is under my jurisdiction. And today, I'm here because we found non-native reeds choking the flow and a suspicious amount of fertilizer runoff." Verna blinked. "You're..." "What? My agency regulates this watershed, Verna. I'm not here as a homeowner. I'm here because someone has been violating environmental codes and I've got reason to believe it's coming from this neighborhood." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Dale stopped writing mid-sentence. I stepped toward the bulldozer, climbed back in, and fired it up again. "Now, unless you want to explain to the county inspector why you tried to interfere with a regulatory operation, I suggest you get your golf cart off state-monitored land." Verna sputtered something about calling an emergency board meeting, but she was already backing away. I waved cheerfully. "You go ahead and do that. I'll be here doing my job." I was halfway through dismantling the derelict footbridge when a black SUV with magnetic HOA security decals came creeping down the gravel path like it was tailing a fugitive. The windows were tinted, the tires brand new. It rolled to a stop just short of the bulldozer's rear treads. Out stepped a man I'd never seen before, tall, wiry build, mirrored sunglasses, and a ballistic vest that read Community Enforcement Division. He adjusted his earpiece like he was waiting for a go order. "You Brandon Greeley?" he asked, chin tilted like he thought I'd flinch. I cut the engine and stepped off the machine. "That's my name, and you are Officer Steele. HOA Enforcement," he said, flashing a badge that looked like it came from an online novelty store. "We've received multiple reports of unauthorized activity near protected community zones." I glanced at the SUV. His passenger was still seated, scanning something on a tablet. "Protected by who exactly?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The Homeowners Association of Sycamore Hills. This entire area is subject to preservation under our charter." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. "You're trespassing on county-regulated watershed. This land was deeded to the state over a decade ago. Here, official GIS overlay from the Department of Environmental Management." He didn't even look. "We'll need to see a permit for the machinery, and we're going to have to impound the vehicle until we verify your credentials." That got a laugh out of me. "Impound? That machine's registered through the state. You touch it, and I'll have you explaining yourself to the Attorney General's office by morning." The passenger finally stepped out. She was younger, maybe late 20s, clipboard in hand, wearing a navy polo with the HOA emblem embroidered over the chest. She didn't speak, just walked around snapping photos like she was documenting a crime scene. I watched her angle for a shot of the open trench where we'd removed broken concrete bags someone had dumped years ago. "You with him?" She didn't answer. I turned back to Steele. "You're over your head. Seriously. Whatever Verna told you, this isn't some backyard fence dispute." He took a step closer, lowering his sunglasses so I could see the twitch in his eye. "We have a mandate to protect the interests of this community. You're disrupting the ecosystem and damaging shared assets." I tilted my head. "You mean the bridge that hadn't been inspected since the Bush administration? The one with rotted beams and exposed nails?" "Yeah, I tore it out, and guess what we found underneath? Illegal pesticide containers. Empty, cracked, leaking." He blinked. That got him. I didn't wait. I pulled a sealed evidence bag from the passenger seat of my truck and held it up. "Collected under supervision. Already logged with the county's environmental crimes unit." The clipboard girl hesitated. First time she looked unsure. Steele recovered quickly. "You got a warrant for that collection?" "I don't need one. I'm not law enforcement. I'm a regulatory authority conducting a state-initiated field audit. And since you've now interfered with that process, I suggest you call your HOA president and tell her she just escalated this to criminal obstruction." He opened his mouth, then thought better of it. I stepped past him and pointed at the creek. "See that pipe running under the edge? That's where we trace the fertilizer runoff. It doesn't come from this side. It flows in from the east bank, from the landscaping drains behind the clubhouse." Clipboard girl shifted uncomfortably. I continued. "We've already taken soil and water samples. If the nitrate levels are what I think they are, your board's been violating state water quality standards for years. And when the fines drop, because they'll be 6 figures minimum." Steele rubbed his jaw. "You're bluffing." I pulled out a laminated ID. "Would I bluff if I was the person who signs off on those fine assessments?" He stared at the badge. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. Clipboard girl lingered. "You're really with the state?" "I supervise the regional field division for 3 counties." She swallowed. "They told us this was just some guy trying to build a dock." I raised an eyebrow. "Did they also mention the board was cited for misappropriating reserve funds last year, or that they've been billing residents for creek preservation while dumping lawn chemicals into the water?" Her eyes widened. "No," I nodded at the SUV. "Think hard about who you're protecting." She didn't answer but walked quickly back to the vehicle. Moments later, they reversed all the way down the path. I turned back to the trench, heart thudding, not from nerves but from what I now realized. The HOA hadn't just overstepped, this was organized concealment. Someone on that board had known about the pesticide dump. The bridge had been hiding it, and now that I'd exposed it, they were scrambling. I pulled out my phone and dialed. "Yeah, it's me," I said when the environmental crimes investigator picked up. "We've got a bigger problem. Someone's been laundering landscaping chemicals through the HOA budget. I need a warrant for clubhouse storage access, and I want the treasurer's records subpoenaed." The investigator didn't hesitate. "We'll have a team there by morning." By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I'd marked the last contaminated zone with orange flags. My bulldozer sat idle, but my truck bed was full of evidence bags. I locked them in the cab and set up a wildlife camera trained on the trailhead. If they came back tonight, I'd know. I was finishing up when a familiar voice called out from the property border. "Brandon." I turned. It was Mrs. Keating, the widow who lived 2 lots over, leaning on her cane. "You all right, ma'am?" She nodded, eyes darting toward the creek. "I heard yelling earlier. I figured it was Verna again. She's been sending people door to door saying you're putting the neighborhood at risk." I sighed. "She's trying to cover her tracks." Mrs. Keating stepped closer. "I know, that's why I brought this." She handed me a wrinkled envelope. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of HOA newsletters dating back 5 years. One had a budget line labeled "Environmental Maintenance, $60,000 allocated annually." "She told us it was to preserve the creek," Mrs. Keating said, "but I never saw anyone doing anything back here. No cleanups, no inspections. Just the same weeds and trash until you showed up." I stared at the numbers. "This is useful, really useful," she smiled faintly. "You're not just some guy with a machine, I knew it." I helped her back to her porch and promised to keep her updated. That night, I filed a formal request for a forensic audit of HOA finances. The county's legal team approved it within the hour. The next morning, I arrived to find yellow tape across the clubhouse doors. 2 sheriff's cruisers sat out front. I didn't bother going in. I already knew what they found. Storage records, unregistered pesticide barrels, and a ledger with names. The game had changed. And the board. They were about to learn what happens when you try to bully the wrong man on the wrong land. The hum of cicadas was just beginning to rise when the first unmarked car rolled past my driveway, slow and silent, like it was testing the air. I was on my front porch with a mug of black coffee and a legal pad covered in notes from the night before. The County Environmental Crimes Unit had already flagged the pesticide barrels, but what had them riled up now wasn't just dumping waste, it was where the money came from. Another vehicle pulled up behind the first. This one belonged to the district attorney's office. I recognized the plate. I set the coffee aside and met them at the gate. "Morning, Greeley," said the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Mendez. She wore no badge on her belt, but she didn't need one. "We need to talk about the HOA's reserve account." "I figured you would," I said, opening the gate for her team. "I've got statements from 3 residents who received contradictory notices about creek maintenance fees, all within the same fiscal year." Mendez nodded and signaled her tech to follow. "That matches what we found in the treasurer's ledger. They've been cycling payments through 2 shell vendors. Environmental Solutions LLC and Creek Safe Management, neither of which holds a contractor's license," I added. She raised an eyebrow. "Exactly. And both trace back to a P.O. box registered to Dale Alcott's cousin in Nevada. We've got subpoena authority now. But if this reaches federal waterways, we may be handing it off." I pointed toward the clubhouse. 2 forensic accountants were already inside, combing through file cabinets. "You'll want the blue binder in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the rear office." "That's where they hid the maintenance contracts." Mendez motioned to a uniformed officer. "Go." As the officer jogged off, she turned back to me. "You said something about nitrate levels near the pump line. They're elevated enough that the state could classify the creek as impaired, which triggers federal reporting, and if they falsified any of those water quality disclosures." I let the implication hang. "Then we're looking at felony environmental fraud," Mendez finished. "Which puts Verna and the treasurer in a very different courtroom." I could see the gears already turning behind her eyes. This wasn't just about HOA overreach anymore. This was a money laundering operation hiding behind suburban landscaping. By late morning, 2 more county vehicles had arrived. One brought a hydrologist. The other carried a mobile lab rig that they parked near the creek. The techs worked fast, taking samples, logging GPS coordinates, and mapping the chemical flow using thermal imaging. I stayed out of their way and kept my focus where it needed to be on the residents, Mrs. Keating wasn't the only one who'd come forward. At least 7 homeowners had approached me since the night before, each with a different version of the same story. Fines for maintenance that never happened, threats for non-payment, and in one case, a lien filed over a tree encroachment violation that turned out to be entirely fabricated. That last one came from a retired fire captain named Harris, who met me near the footpath carrying a folder of his own. "They told me my tree roots were damaging the slope," he said, flipping open the folder to reveal aerial photos taken over the past 5 years. I had an arborist check it. "Roots are nowhere near the drainage line. They ever show you proof?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just a warning letter with some grainy photo and a demand for $700. Said if I didn't pay, they'd start foreclosure proceedings." I took the folder and scanned the documents. "That's civil extortion." He leaned in. "You think they'll actually see jail time for this, if I have anything to do with it?" I said. "Yes." By noon, the sheriff's department had cordoned off the clubhouse, and Verna was nowhere to be found. Her usual mid-morning golf cart patrol never materialized. Word was, she hadn't answered her phone since the night before. That changed around 1:30, when a silver Lexus barreled into the neighborhood from the east entrance, cutting across the median and parking halfway on the curb in front of her house. Verna stumbled out, heels in hand, hair frizzed from what looked like an overnight drive. She didn't head inside, she marched straight toward me. "You had no right to involve law enforcement," she hissed, eyes bloodshot. "This is a private matter, you're sabotaging the community." I held up a document. "This is a warrant, signed by Judge Terrence in district court. Your board funneled over $200,000 into shell accounts over 4 years, and you concealed illegal pesticide dumping near a federally monitored waterway." "You don't understand," she said, words tumbling over each other now. "We needed the funds for emergency repairs. The county kept delaying permits, we had to act. By forging vendor contracts and threatening homeowners with legal action," I asked. "That's not acting, that's racketeering." Her gaze darted toward the creek, then back to the clubhouse. "You weren't supposed to be involved. That's the problem," I said. "You thought no one would be." She lunged forward, grabbing the paper from my hand, but the officer nearby had already stepped in. She was placed under arrest for obstruction and taken into custody without another word. Later that day, the county confirmed the nitrate concentration in the creek exceeded baseline by over 400%. That put the entire downstream ecosystem at risk, including the elementary school's nature trail. Local news caught wind faster than I expected. By sunset, a Channel 6 van was parked across the street, and a reporter was interviewing homeowners on their front lawns. Dale tried to slip out the back gate around dusk, but 2 deputies were waiting behind the hedges. He didn't say a word as they led him to the cruiser. The real bombshell dropped the next morning. An anonymous tip, traced back to someone inside the HOA's finance subcommittee, revealed that the pesticide dump wasn't just accidental. The barrels had been stored in the maintenance shed for over a year. When disposal costs came in too high, the board had voted off record to handle it internally. That meant pouring them into a trench behind the clubhouse and backfilling with gravel. The maintenance crew was never informed. One of them had fallen ill months ago, and his symptoms now aligned with known exposure markers. If the DA could prove causation, this would escalate into criminal negligence with bodily harm a felony. I walked the ridge behind the creek that afternoon, watching cleanup crews in hazmat suits begin soil extraction around the contamination site. The bulldozer sat dormant now, its work complete, but the real excavation had just begun in court. The county had already begun proceedings to dissolve the current HOA board under emergency statute. A community vote was scheduled for the following week to elect a temporary oversight council. I'd been asked to supervise the transition until a new charter could be ratified. I declined the chair position. Instead, I nominated Mrs. Keating. She stood before the assembled residents that evening, cane in one hand, a folder in the other. "We were lied to," she said, voice steady. "But we don't fix it by hiding. We fix it by taking back what was ours in the first place. Our homes, our peace, and our right to be heard." They applauded until the sun dropped behind the ridge. I stood in the back, watching. No more fake fines, no more golf cart patrols, just neighbors, finally free from the grip of a board that had forgotten who it served. As I turned to leave, one of the cleanup workers called out, "Hey, Greeley, you still gonna clear the East Trail next week?" I nodded. "Yeah, but this time with volunteers. We weren't just restoring a creek, we were rebuilding trust." By the following Tuesday, the neighborhood's atmosphere had changed so drastically, it felt like someone had turned the air right side up. Gone were the constant patrols, the surveillance drones Dale had commissioned without community consent, and the weekly threats disguised as courtesy violation notes stuffed into mailboxes. The clubhouse remained sealed under county order, and every former board member had either resigned, been arrested, or vanished behind a lawyer's voicemail. I hadn't planned to return to the creek that day. My report was already filed, the regulatory violations documented, and the evidence chain secured. But a call from the auditor's office changed that. "They've got something," Mendez had said. "And it's bigger than we thought." I met her at the edge of the trail near the stand of ironwoods where the soil had been flagged for secondary testing. She held a tablet in one hand and gestured for me to follow her into the temporary command tent set up beside the access road. Inside, the air was heavy with printer heat and the smell of fresh dirt. A technician pulled up a screen showing a scanned document, an internal HOA memo dated 2 years prior. The letterhead bore the old board's emblem with a watermark of the creek in the background. I leaned in. "What am I looking at?" Mendez pointed to a section underlined in red. "This is a request for reimbursement $22,000 for landscape mitigation and erosion control, submitted by a company called Aquaterra Solutions. They never pulled a permit under that name. They never pulled anything. Aquaterra doesn't exist." We traced the account it was paid to. Guess who it's registered under? I didn't answer. She tapped the screen again. Verna's daughter. Different last name, but the tax ID matches, and she filed it as an agricultural consultant, which means she claimed exemption from oversight. I stepped back. They used fake restoration invoices to funnel money into family accounts. Not just that, Mendez said. The funds came from a state grant, my breath caught. Wait. Yeah, Environmental Preservation Matching Fund. A state grant program that reimburses 30% of qualified restoration expenses. The HOA filed for that using falsified documentation. They received nearly $70,000 over 3 years, all of it based on fabricated work. So it's fraud at the state level. Worse. Because they forged certified reports to get it, it crosses into federal grant fraud. That meant mandatory sentencing. I stared at the screen, mind already racing through the implications. This wasn't just about a corrupt HOA anymore. This was a coordinated abuse of public funds, involving forgery, embezzlement, and impersonation of licensed professionals. I turned to the technician. "Can you isolate the GPS tags on the invoices?" She nodded and brought up a topographic overlay. A series of red dots lit up along the eastern bank of the creek, including one that sat squarely on the border of a protected floodplain. "They claim to have planted native sedges and installed erosion barriers there," she said. "But when our team checked the site, they found nothing. No plants. No barriers, just evidence of recent soil disturbance." "They buried something," Mendez nodded grimly. "We're bringing in ground-penetrating radar tomorrow, but Brandon, if they dumped hazardous materials into a floodplain, that's a federal offense. Clean Water Act violations. It won't just be fines anymore. It'll be prison." I left the tent without another word. Later that night, I pulled the drone footage my team had captured during the initial field assessment. I hadn't looked closely before at the eastern bank. It was overgrown, and I'd focused on the pesticide leak near the clubhouse. But now, zooming in on the time-stamped footage, I saw it. 2 men hauling black drums from a pickup truck to the edge of the embankment. No labels. No safety gear. The footage was from 7 months back. I forwarded it to the federal liaison and drove straight to the DA's office. By morning, the radar scan confirmed our suspicions. There were 6 barrels buried in a staggered line along the embankment. Each one was rusted, leaking, and filled with an unidentified chemical sludge. The cleanup team sealed the area off with reinforced barriers, and the EPA initiated a full site remediation order. That evening, the federal indictments dropped wire fraud, grant fraud, environmental crimes. Criminal conspiracy. Verna, Dale, the treasurer, and Verna's daughter were all named. The charges carried mandatory minimums, and given the sheer volume of evidence, no one expected a plea deal. The HOA had effectively ceased to exist as a legal entity, and under emergency provisions, the county assumed administrative control of the neighborhood until a new governance system could be formed. But the real surprise came at the town hall meeting held that Friday. Dozens of residents gathered at the community park, no longer afraid of surveillance or retaliation. Folding chairs were arranged in a wide circle. No podiums, no microphones, just neighbors face to face. Mrs. Keating stood and cleared her throat. "We've all lived under their shadow for years," she said. "They told us they were protecting us, that they knew best, but all they were protecting was their own pockets." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. She held up a petition. "We're proposing a new model, no centralized HOA. No fines, no private security, just a voluntary neighborhood alliance. We handle maintenance together. We file permits transparently, and we vote on every decision. Someone asked about enforcement. Mrs. Keating smiled. We don't need enforcers. We need neighbors who talk to each other. The petition passed unanimously. Afterward, I stood by the old clubhouse, watching volunteers remove the last of the caution tape. A young couple approached me, new residents who'd moved in just before the scandal broke wide open. We didn't know what we were walking into, the woman said. But you helped fix it. We're staying. Her partner added, you ever think about running for town council? I shook my head. I'm better behind the scenes. But I'll help you start a community garden. They laughed, and we made plans to meet the following week. As I walked back toward the creek, I passed the old trail where the fake erosion barriers were supposed to be. The barrels had been removed, the soil replaced, and new native plants had already been staked into the ground, this time by real conservationists. At the water's edge, a pair of egrets landed in the shallows, picking their way through the reeds. The ecosystem would recover, so would the people. And the next time someone rolled up in a golf cart shouting about power they didn't have, there'd be a very different response waiting. Because now, the neighborhood knew the truth. They weren't just homeowners, they were the ones in charge.